Hi everyone, Kirby fan here for our very first copy ability spotlight with a YouTube premiere. I don't want to waste too much time because I'm sure this video is going to be an hour or something, so I'll go over the pleasantries real quick. Big thank you to everyone who's voting in these videos, and don't forget to leave a comment voting for the next spotlight. And, you know, after you comment, don't forget to just leave a little like and subscribe for all that. Help me out. Let me know what you think about Fire. Do you like it? Did you think it was better or worse than it wound up being? Do you think that the ability is heat? Comments, like, subscribing, all those things help me out, and I appreciate all of them. Now on with the show. Fire, a destructive yet beautiful force of nature, both loved and feared by an insurmountable amount of creatures all over the world. Just like Kirby! Fire is another one of the OG abilities introduced way back in Kirby's Adventure and has stuck around in most of the games since, all the way up to Star Allies. Those of you who do your homework know that, in last time's Mirror episode, I said that Fire had actually won for that month, but I needed more time to do the research and stuff for this Fire Spotlight. And that should tell you all that you need to know about the ability, but hey, it's winter, the temperatures are still pretty low, cold and all, so let's warm up by talking about Fire throughout all of the Kirby games. Not too long ago, we discussed Ice in Kirby's Adventure and compared it to Fire. These two are, after all, effectively the same ability. And, no surprise, similar to Ice, Fire doesn't serve much of a purpose. It's got pretty good range, so if you're practicing normal Kirby movement or something, and you want to safe out against the many enemies that litter this game, you can do a lot worse. I'd at least argue that it's better than Ice, if only because the Ice block increases the chance that the game is gonna lag, but really we're not talking about optimal abilities here, not very good. Nightmare and Dreamland could be a different story, given how boss killers are much more important than they were in Adventure, but Fire, curiously enough, is actually pretty weak. It deals 5 points of damage per hit, which might sound okay, but compared to some of its competition, Hammer deals 9 damage per hit, Needle 8, Spark 7, Sword 6, and Ball 14. Fire has better range, which makes it better for playing it safe, but Needle, Spark, and Sword all offer that as well, and if you've seen the Needle Spotlight, you kinda know that ability, it's not very good. On the bright side, at least, Fire is statistically better than Ice, which only deals 3 damage per hit, with the perk of Ice blocks dealing 10. But how often will you really hit with an Ice block? Alright, and now, the big one. Kirby Superstar is highly regarded for many things, with one of them being introducing some of the best abilities in the franchise, but another thing that it did was take away redundancy by combining abilities together. In this case, Fire and Burning were merged together to create Fire, which initially sounds very promising. In Adventure, Fire was a boss killer, while Burning was used for horizontal momentum. With Superstar's expanded moveset, Fire could feasibly add some more vertical action to its moveset and become one of the best abilities thus far. Unfortunately, that's not how it worked out. Burning was hit hard with the Nerf Hammer coming from Adventure. While you can now aim it when using it in the air, by default it moves Kirby down when using it, gravity and all, so you don't get much by aiming it up. That said, you do get a big vertical boost by jumping and then immediately using it, which kind of salvages something, but worse off, and what utterly killed it, that whole gravity thing, yeah, because of that, you only get to use Burning in the air once, maybe twice, before landing. This makes it a much slower option compared to, pressing a button and winning at game. If you hit a wall, then you can technically use it again, but that kinda defeats the whole purpose of using it to move around quickly. Burning's new aerial attack, Fireball Spin, real creative I know, takes over, and that move has no momentum at all. If you land with it, Kirby will roll forward quickly for a bit, but it has a long cooldown period, removing any potential use that it could have. While I often cite Planet Robobot and, to a lesser extent, Return to Dreamland as the heavy hitters for Kirby power creep, Superstar changed everything when it came to copy abilities. Return to Dreamland would later polish what Superstar did, but seeing as how this was the first to go with an expanded, more action-packed roster of abilities, many older ones got left in the dust, while excellent new abilities, such as Wing and Jet, took their place. Some of the older abilities, think Wheel and Plasma, stuff like that, they turned out fine. Fire just doesn't fall into either of these categories. It's outclassed. It was definitely felt much more on the mobility side of things, but in terms of boss beating, Fire also can't keep up. OG Superstar is really wonky when it comes to abilities dealing damage, and if you want to keep up, you have to have something crazy overpowered. A Plasma's charge being as fast as it is, Wheelie Rider's Star Shot dealing as much damage as it does, etc. Fire does have attacks that were designed to deal big damage to bosses, and it even has some pretty cool tech where if you have a controller that you can hit up and down on at the same time, Kirby's default fire attacks shoot straight up, which is okay for dealing some quick damage, but compared to the crazy heights that other abilities can reach, it really doesn't compare. At peak performance, it's tough to use, so it isn't even an ability that's easy to abuse, such as Hammer, for example. We now move on to another Sakurai game. Fire's just not been very good in his games, has it? And we move on to have some fun with Curvy Air Ride. And to give credit where it's due, Fire isn't bad. It certainly has its uses, especially in narrow pathways where hitting enemies with it is easier. And the actual fire that stays on the ground lingers too, and it can hit around 4 times before going away. It sounds pretty good, but it's just not worth using in the long run. Again, I wouldn't call it bad, but the cases where it's useful are far too uncommon. On the whole, you'd rather use better damage dealers like Sword or Needle, or ranged attacks that deal comparable damage, such as Plasma. Fire is on the lower end of the efficiency scale, but seeing as how we really haven't covered that many good abilities for Air Ride yet, it's close to being with the best ones that we've covered so far. Not Plasma or Needle, but still up there. Good job, Fire. You've got that going for you at least. Oh, but all of that is only really applicable for Air Ride. For City Trial, where things are far more open, it's much less useful. It's actually just straight up a bad ability in City Trial. But one of the easiest achievements for the checklist to clear is KOing other Kirbys with the Firecracker. It's not fire, but I mean, it has fire in the name, right? Counts for something? No? There it is, I can agree with that. Okay, we only have one more underwhelming game for Fire to go. Alrighty, and it's Squeak Squad! Just Squeak Squad, no Amazing Mirror this time. Wow, I haven't done that in a long time. Yeah, anyway, burning is in Fire's kit in this game, but Squeak Squad Wheel is just on a whole other level. Straight up, burning is useless. I'm glad that it's a part of Fire's kit, so I don't have to call burning useless, but also because Fire's actually kind of almost decent? For runs that opt for mixless, Fire actually does okay. There are a few points in the early game where you can use it before it eventually just winds up getting outclassed by Wheel, as everything does in Squeak Squad. And sure, that's insanely impressive by Squeak Squad standards, but compared to what we're about to see, really, it's not that much to write home about. And with that, all of the games where Fire leaves more of a warm breeze than a blazing inferno have been covered. Needless to say, these games all have one thing in common. They're all Fire. I did say that we'd be covering both Fire and Burning for this spotlight. Not to leave Fire out of the fun, though. On the contrary, Fire does have some games that can even surpass what Burning can do. Which flame shines brightest, though? Get ready, because there is a lot. Before we go into detail with Burning in Kirby's Adventure, let me just say, we're talking about Kirby's Adventure. The ability's good. It's a big surprise if you've been watching these spotlights for a while. If you haven't, Well, the playlist is right there, so you can check out the other episodes while also liking and subscribing to my channel. I don't want to get your hopes up too high, though, because burning in Kirby's Adventure is just good. It gives you a crazy amount of horizontal distance, but considering the startup and the cooldown, there is a level of precision required to using it. It also doesn't offer any vertical distance, unlike, if you've watched one Adventure Spotlight, you've watched them all, Tornado, which also has more invincibility than Burning. Still, Burning's good traits at least give it a lot of appeal for beginners looking to get their feet wet. I hope that's still a phrase people still use with adventure speedrunning. And even in the current world record run by Wakaza, it's used for a bit in World 4 where Tornado's perks aren't as needed. This is probably the worst that Fire or Burning get while still being good abilities, but trust me, that's got nothing to do with Burning itself. Tornado's just kinda like that. Now, imagine a game that's just like Kirby's Adventure, but Tornado is balanced in the opposite direction. It got nerfed so hard that it's never used for speedrunning at all. This is a Nightmare in Dreamland, and while Burning isn't perfect, it arguably became the best ability in the game for moving around. It's largely similar to how it is in Adventure, but with two key differences. First off, the more minor buff it got, Nightmare doesn't lag as much as Adventure does, so using Burning doesn't require nearly as much precision as it used to. The big one though is the frame data. The startup is about the same as it was back then, which is fine, but compare the cooldown on these two. Because of this, it's very viable to just spam Burning to quickly clear a lot of these levels. Precision is still generally needed, but it's much less taxing with these two changes. Now, with all of that being said, Burning is not a boss killer. It only deals 5 damage per hit, just like Fire, except Fire actually works as a multi-hit move. Burning shoots right past bosses, slowing down the damage you deal to a halt. You could definitely argue that Wheel is the overall better ability, even regarding mobility, but Burning has the advantage in how it can be used freely in the air, saving a lot of time that Wheel would be spending floating through the air normally. It's a case-by-case basis for which one is better, where, and while Wheel is used more, I personally lean towards Burning being the best horizontally based movement overall, even if Wheel outclasses it in certain areas. High jump is better for vertical platforming, but seeing as how those levels are fewer, Burning is probably, in my opinion at least, the overall best ability in the game for movement. As if all of that wasn't crazy enough, imagine Burning in a game where moving is the only thing you can base an ability's value on. That would be Kirby's Dream Course, and the hole-in-one opportunities that Burning grants are beyond anything that most of the other abilities could compare to. It can't do everything by itself, and other abilities such as Tornado and Wheel certainly hold their own, but Burning's massive speed boost certainly helps. Abilities in Dream Course are very simple, so it's hard to really describe what makes Burning as good as it is beyond simply saying speed boost that it gives you is just completely busted, so I'm hoping the background footage can kind of speak for itself. It does take a lot of precision to make work, and a few of the hole-in-ones that it can get are really hard, maybe they're not even practical, but when you pull off something like this, hey Parasol, it helps you realize just how insane this ability really is. You're bouncing off walls for this long like a total maniac, and you still have enough mobility to get a hole-in-one. For speedrunning, on the other hand, well, of course it's crazy good, but it faces a lot more competition, considering a lot more goes into a speedrun than hole-in-ones. Actually, for speedrunning, you almost never want a hole-in-one, as the animation that plays when you get one makes every hole take drastically longer. This is where abilities like Needle and Stone come into play. They're your easiest anti-hole-in-one abilities to use, and others that help a bit more with mobility, such as Parasol and Tornado, can also help in this regard too. All of that said though, Burning is still really good. That speed boost that was so good for getting hole-in-ones is invaluable when you're, speed running. It's better compared to other abilities for getting hole-in-ones than it is for speedrunning, that's all. So, is burning the best ability in the game all around? I know a lot of you watching right now who have played Dream Course are probably thinking about UFO right now, and in a vacuum, yeah, UFO is a lot better than most abilities in, let's be real here, most Kirby games, but availability is actually a huge factor in Dream Course. Unlike the main series games, mix opportunities are pretty hard to find, and UFO is just as, if not even more, rare. You'll be using burning to get a lot more hole-in-ones or better times than UFO, and I think the real discussion for the best ability in the game should actually be between burning and tornado. Regardless, burning is one of the abilities in the running. It's an incredible ability in Kirby's Dream Course. When talking about Kirby's Dreamland 2, most of what you'll hear revolves around Coo. And for good reason. Coo is by far the best animal friend in the entire game. Unlike Kirby and Rick, he has a dash, and unlike Kine, he can use it out of the water. Coo plus Cutter is one of the strongest ability combinations in terms of utility and power, and since Coo already has mobility going for him, the combination is basically all you need for most of Dreamland 2. But that keyword is most. Regardless of how you run Dreamland 2, Coo will not be available until the second world, with your only alternatives being Kirby and Rick. And look guys, I love Rick and all, but is he useful? Not at all. So that leaves us with Kirby, and for mobility options, he really only has Parasol and Burning. And don't get me wrong, Kirby plus Parasol is actually pretty good, due to how Parasol Float works after bouncing on enemies, and just bouncing on enemies in general. It's wholly outclassed by Kirby plus Burning. And I don't really think I need to tell you why. It's for much of the same reason as Adventure and Nightmare, only with way less cooldown, but also a range reduction if it's spammed. That second part sounds like a big detriment, but honestly, it doesn't really amount to much. It is actually really easy to work around. The bigger issue is, once again, Burning is not very good at taking out bosses and mini-bosses, which is actually outdone by Kirby plus Parasol, but you don't have to worry about having Kirby plus Burning for very long. You get Coo in World 2, but for that first one, Kirby plus Burning serves you best. And look, like those games, it's not totally bad for taking out the bosses. You can definitely make a case for it being good enough. Also, Kine plus Burning is good. Projectiles like this are always nice to have, and there are a few points where you'd rather have Kine than Coo. Ice is really the only option that you need to worry about when you're underwater, but when you're not underwater, Kine plus Burning is basically the way to go. Coo plus Burning is decent, but in this game at least, unnecessary. As for Rick plus Burning, let's just not talk about Rick, please. Kirby's Block Ball, unfortunately, isn't a very interesting game to talk about for efficiency, but at the very least, Burning is a great ability while it's around. At any point while Kirby is on the field, he can use Burning to shoot up and destroy any obstacle in his wake. You only have this for around a third of the game, so it's not perfect, but as soon as you get it, you just don't get rid of it. Which I guess can be said for the other abilities, but this one actually speeds things up dramatically. It's another round of second verse, same as the first, for Kirby's Dreamland 3. Well, kind of. You get Coo way earlier on, making Kirby plus Burning way less useful, and Kine is used a lot more. He's used for the entirety of World 2. Crazy, but functionally, everything's the same. That said, Coo was given one of the most overpowered things he could have gotten, and that is a better dash. Burning plus Coo is not ideal for boss fights, so if it can't have damage or mobility, what would Coo plus Burning have? Mobility, of course. Of course it still has mobility. What did you think I was gonna say? See, Coo's dash is great for the many wide open areas of Dreamland 3, but it also has a lot of tight caves that you need to maneuver through. In theory, an ability like Coo plus Cutter would work best since it's a projectile, think Dreamland 2, but the reason Coo plus Burning is taken instead is because it keeps up your momentum. It's also invincible, which helps against Shotzos. Even normal enemies though, even if they're not invincible, it doesn't really matter. I should note that, even if Kirby plus Burning is worse off than in Dreamland 2, it's still very good, and it has basically all of the perks that it used to. It's invincible, it has low cooldown, the good stuff. Kind plus burning is still good too, but generally, it's not needed. As for the other friends, it's not worth using, although in a best ending run, it does so happen to be used with Nago and Rick. Let's go, Rick Redemption arc. Unfortunately for Rick, that arc's actually gonna have to wait a while. You'll get your chance. Because Kirby 64 axed the animal friends in favor of just mixing abilities together. And, wow, does burning do nothing but benefit from this change? As it is, out of every ability in Kirby 64, the only one to make you go faster without a combination is burning. So already, it has an upper hand. But how does it fare with other abilities in the mix? Well, before anything, I just gotta mention fire plus ice. The melting ice cube. It doesn't really do anything for optimal Kirby play. Really, it doesn't do much for casual anyway. But if you're watching my videos and you don't know just how much of a filthy memer I am, hi, I'm Kirby Fan. Please subscribe to the channel. I upload tons more content. Thanks. So out of every other ability combination, which do you think is the most effective ability combination in the entire game? Burning is included in this, so there's your hint. Maybe it's Burning plus Cutter, that crazy cool fire sword that deals big damage and can even work as a projectile? Or maybe Burn plus Spark, where Kirby rubs his head to create static and sets it on fire instead? Or maybe Burning plus Stone, where Kirby becomes a volcano? No, it's none of these. The real winner here is Burning plus Ice. Burning plus Burning breaks Kirby 64. The distance this travels alongside the speed at which it moves is most of what you need to know. Yeah, it's got a lot of cooldown, but this is Kirby 64. Nothing else in this game really moves at a fast pace, so whatever time you lose on cooldown is more than made up for with the distance you travel. As if that weren't enough, this combo is also a boss killer. Watch it burn down these trees and soon after, wispy woods. Don't start forest fires, friends. Standalone burning is good, and I have to mention Burning plus Bomb for giving Kirby a slight mobility boost while also giving him a great vertical boost while dealing damage, which can help with a minimum jumps kind of playthrough. But Burning plus Burning is really where it's at. I don't even know what to add here. There's just no downside. It doesn't leave me with a lot to say, so I guess we'll just, move on to the next game? Normally I'm kind of bummed about this kind of thing, but we still have a bunch of games to go over, so maybe this is a blessing in disguise. Also, I did this for the Ice Spotlight, so I'm gonna do it here. I won't be talking about Burning plus Ice for a long time now, since, we've gone over both the abilities involved, so give me this and we'll move on, okay? Okay. Now, the next game on our list, Amazing Mirror. Finally, I get to talk about an ability being good in this game. Except not really, because now I get to talk about 2 abilities being good in this game. And based on every trend that you know of in this video, you'd assume that Burning would be the better of the 2 abilities, right? Well, let's start with Burning. It's good. It's not bad, not great. The problem with Burning in this game is that Wheel exists, and seeing as how this is an Arika original Kirby game, it basically dominates everything. In most Kirby games, it's easier to stand out as an ability that focuses on mobility rather than dealing damage and handling bosses. And this is because different kinds of levels call for different kinds of movement, and in many cases, one ability can't really handle everything. And the same applies for Wheel, believe it or not, since it has very little in the ways of vertical movement, unlike Squeak Squad. The problem here is that no ability really does, leaving horizontal movement as the only metric that you really need to worry about, and Wheel far outclasses everything in that regard, including Burning. Burning is still good, of course, and you even see it in the any % run for a Mira shortcut, but it's not the real star of this whole Amazing Mirror segment. No, the underdog story victor goes to Fire. Amazing Mirror levels are much more open than those in Nightmare and Dreamland, meaning that runners have to route their runs much more carefully. This doesn't always work to Wheel's advantage, and in some cases, it can't progress due to, say, a bomb block being on the other side of a wall, or an ability/mix being available that works better. Stuff like that. While losing wheel is never ideal, saving time is the #1 priority, and in instances such as this one, you have options. Mixing for UFO is the overall best strat, and while sword is another option you can go for, you do lose sword very shortly after if you go that route. Going fire here not only works, but it even saves time since you don't fall back underwater and you'll lose your ability. That's point #1. My personal favorite use of fire is against the final boss, Dark Mind. Well, not actually quite Dark Mind, but one of the mini stages in between. See, when Dark Mind shoots out stars to attack you, you can either get ice, fire, or spark, depending on what color he shoots out. If you get fire or ice, you can actually use this to sequence break and save a good chunk of time in the very next room. You should note that, once again, Arika Wheel can do anything, and that includes being a boss killer. But, unlike roaming fast, it isn't the singular best boss killer in every situation. For the most part, Stone and Smash are the two best abilities, but Smash is crazy rare and impractical for a main game speedrun. And while Stone fares much better, you won't always have it. Case in point, the Master Hand and the Crazy Hand fight. The overall best strategy is to actually just hope your AI partners have good abilities, but regardless if they do or not, you actually go into this fight with fire due to the high fast damage that it can deal. You eventually drop it for Stone, but if your partners are good enough, you may not actually need to ditch it for Stone. And even then, of the two abilities, fire is drastically easier to beat the two with, so with enough help, you're actually kind of fine to just maul the two with fire and friends and then move on. I wouldn't call fire incredible or anything in this game, so few abilities actually are, but the fact that it stands on its own for perks that have either been outclassed or outright haven't mattered thus far is so unbelievable that it deserves to be celebrated. I don't use the term underdog story much in these spotlights, or really any of my videos, but if there's one instance that I have to use it, it's this one. I can't believe that it's good in all games. It's Amazing Mirror, an Arika game, and it's because of its range. What? Moving on. Being a copy ability in Canvas Curse is hard. Because of the way that drawing loops works, normal Kirby is oftentimes the best way to go. And when that isn't the case, well, too bad, because it's faster to reset the game after every level instead of just playing the dash minigame, which gets rid of Kirby's ability. Despite all of those drawbacks though, there are some abilities that can stand out and still remain useful. And at this point in the video, are you really surprised that one of these is burning? Canvas Curse actually helps with one of burning's biggest weaknesses, that being the startup and the cooldown. They still exist in Canvas Curse, no doubt, but by line drawing, you can help Kirby moving throughout the entire thing. This also fixes burning's issue with verticality. Look, I'm trying really hard to spice up the word variety. This video is really long, although less so in tight spaces. You can't fix every problem after all. And of course, burning still has all the useful traits from the other games. Useful. Trait. Singular. It's fast. It's really, really fast. Really spammable. While Wheel is the overall better ability, again, it does have that going for it over Wheel. You do need to draw lines in order to keep Wheel safe and or optimized in more wide open areas, or above bottomless pits. With burning, you just keep mashing Kirby with your stylus and you're good to go. In basically every level burning is available in, it's useful. You name it, Ghost Grounds, Mag Mount, Contrast Caves, the works. Burning is used and it is excellent. Before we move on to the next game, I have to be the bearer of bad news and bring up that, after Canvas Curse, Burning was retired into Fire's moveset for good. I mean, that's actually great news, but for the context of the spotlight, I don't know, it's kind of sad. I always enjoyed seeing the differences between these two, but I don't know, it's for the best. Let's just give a quick moment of silence for Burning before we... Oh wait, Superstar Ultra's next? Scratch that, moving on. Now, I like to think that people who watch my videos have a refined palate and are smart enough to catch on to the fact that, even though I ragged on Fire in the OG Superstar, I passed on Superstar Ultra. And this is because Fire in Ultra is actually pretty good. It still suffers a bit in the mobility regard, with all of the same issues that it had from the OG Superstar. No happy ending in that regard. Not! In an unprecedented move, Fire takes its mobility and actually uses it to its advantage against the bosses. In order to deal as much damage in the fastest way possible, abilities often rely on boss downtime to catch up to where they need to go. Deal big damage, boss can't be hurt or something, ability plays catch up, blah blah blah. But not Fire. During this downtime, it is all about dealing as much damage as it possibly can and moving to where it needs to be. The footage you're seeing is TAS, so it's way more optimized compared to what a regular person would be able to do, but it's still the same idea. While it's less useful overall, the brilliantly named Fireball Roll sees some use too in this regard when speed isn't of the essence or the enemy is grounded. With all of that being said, I'm sure a lot of you are wondering, why? Well, that's cool and all, but in theory, this should have worked in Superstar. So what gives? Great question, viewer, and the answer is simple. Superstar and Superstar Ultra are very different games. What Fire can do in the original game just does not compare to the insanely high damage that you see from the best abilities. In Ultra, things were toned down a lot, and while Fire got some nice buffs, Burning actually deals a bit more damage now, for example. That's another perk going to Burning. The core of its efficiency, Fireball Inferno, is actually the same as it was in Superstar. Yeah, except it was just called Fireball in that game. I'm pointing this out now before I get a comment about it. Anyway, Fireball Inferno deals an impressive 40 damage per hit, and while it's not the fastest hitting ability out there, you can reasonably get at least 2 hits against most bosses before it's inefficient. Heck, against the computer virus, you get 4, and that deals 160 damage. That's crazy! The Great Dragon, who has some of the most health in Helper to Hero, really any fight, doesn't even have 300. That's right, it's a 2-rounder on the Great Dragon. The other great perk of Fireball Inferno, as I'm sure the footage has clearly demonstrated, is that if you time it right, you can act out of it as soon as it ends. The main use of this is with a jump so that you can use another attack, which is crazy useful since, I mean, that's all you really need to cancel for in this case. It's really nice when everything comes together like this. Oh, and as for the standard Fire Breath, it's not good, but it's the only thing about Fire's kit that's actually easy to use, so I give it some brownie points. That being said, yes, there is a huge downside to all of this. Fire is really hard to make proper use of. TAS makes everything look easy, but there's a lot of exact spacing and strict button inputs that go into making this work. Case in point, while the TAS is only about 4 minutes, the best clear time we've got with Fire right now for a human is about 5.5. That's kind of a big deal considering these are boss fights. And as far as the arena and the true arena go, records for those in Superstar Ultra are much harder to find, unless you're Hammer, in which case that's where all the resources are. It's generally the go-to for those, and you're lucky to find otherwise, Fire included. But we're not done with Ultra yet, though. While I glossed over this in Superstar, because Fire's just not very good in that game, I figure it's worth going over quick since it's much better here. Fire's mobility is rather good for the regular levels, too. I don't really count 100% speedruns when judging abilities, as I said. Oh wow, more than a dozen times. We've already got that many episodes now. It's still cool to see what abilities can do in that expanded category. And in 100%, Fire actually does get used a little bit in Milky Way Wishes. Fireball Roll comes in clutch big time, combined with the invincibility candy and just the general usefulness of Burning. Using the Fireball Roll off of a ledge gives you crazy good distance. And yeah, that's all I got. Better than nothing. And with that, we move on to the modern era of Kirby, starting with Return to Dreamland. First off, the arena modes, since they're easier to go over, Fire is very good for both. It isn't incredible, but it's just shy of greatness, and settles for the really, really good area. It's kind of a shame because against a few bosses, such as Goliath and Magolor's first phase, it's really good. One of the best abilities at taking them down. Genuinely more than even a great ability. Some of them, such as Landia and Mr. Duder of all bosses, hold it back a little bit, but the big offender here is Galactanite. Fire performs horribly here, and while the fight doesn't take too long at first glance, it's actually among the worst abilities in that fight. Fire has two main ways of dealing damage to bosses: Fireball Inferno and Fireball Spin or Fireball Roll. I'm so happy they decided not to rename these. It is the pinnacle of comedy. And every so often it uses Spinning Fire Breath too, which is exciting because I love that move. But using anything other than Fireball Inferno is mostly to fill in gaps where Inferno can't hit, either due to boss mobility or poor reach, or how long it takes to start up, etc. And in Galactanite Phase 2, sure enough, Fireball is crazy unreliable and it can't hit Galactanite until after he lands. So Galactanite might be really bad and Fire isn't perfect in every other fight, but seeing Fire tear through the bosses it excels at, it's a sight to behold. It isn't just Fireball Inferno, like I said before, but it is the core of what makes Fire as good as it is for the arena modes. For example, Magolor is not really a pushover, and seeing him not even be able to finish his first attack in the true arena is just plain silly. Overall, Fire is very solid, but where Fire shines the absolute brightest is in the main campaign. It should be noted that, looking at any percent, you can't forget that this is Wing's game. As soon as you get Wing, you keep it until close to the very end. It's that good. But, as I've been saying in the more recent spotlights, Wing isn't the only good ability. This isn't a Kirby Squeak Squad case where Wheel literally does everything. Even if Fire doesn't see use in any percent, that doesn't make it any less excellent. And hey, even in any percent, a perk of Fire over Wing is that, if you're going mixless, Fire's available much earlier than Wing is. You can use it for a while and then ditch it for the crazy busted one. Fire's biggest perk compared to the Superstar games, unsurprisingly, was the big buff that Burning got. We're back to how it was in Adventure and the Arica games. If you use Burning in the air and don't land, that's fine. You can just use it again. The one trait that was kept from the Superstar games to help kind of balance it out, though, was that it does start moving down the more that you use it in the air. This makes Fire harder to use than something like Wing, but if you're good enough at positioning and spacing, this actually can be just fine for Fire. Fireball Roll actually got kinda crazy in this game for a few reasons. The easiest to explain, the cooldown at the end of it just got taken out. Completely the end. There's a lot you can do out of this move, but considering your best course of action depends on the situation, just take my word for it, this buff was great. It also got a buff to damage, but that's more related to boss fights, which it can also be useful for in the main campaign, so it's worth mentioning. The number one perk to using Fireball Roll is that, in a similar band-aid fix that I got in Canvas Curse, this somewhat fixes Fire's issue with vertical movement. If you use Fireball Roll on a wall, just forget it. Look at how quickly this ability can move up. That's insane. When you combine it with its offensive options, solid range, and insanely good horizontal speed, it's no surprise that Fire is one of the best abilities in the game. One more fact before we move on. Did you know that in the 100% speedrun, Fire is actually used more than Wing? That was a surprise too, but if you don't believe me, head to the 100% guide on speedrun.com, link in the description with all of my other sources, and Control F Fire and then Control F Wing. Fire gets more results. Plus, you know, Fire's around for much longer and you're still using it on World 7. Yeah, Fire's pretty good in this game. Is this the best that Fire's ever been? Well, no. I think it's better in a game like Dream Course or Crystal Shards anyway, but even then, the actual game that Fire is the single best in compared to any of its other appearances is Triple Deluxe. Like last time, we'll start with the arena modes again, just because they're a lot easier to go over, and it's much of the same as before. It isn't great or anything, but it's on the cusp. There are some differences though. Notably, Fireball Inferno is now the number one attack that Fire has. It was like that before, but even more so now. Not only because of the huge range buff it got, but also because of the way that bosses attack, in particular how their invincibility periods work and how they run into the background. It's best to deal big hits at the exact right time with the perfect amount of damage. This actually gives the standard Fire Breath much more use than it's ever had, it being Fire's fastest option, while also being the easiest way to deal small bits of damage, using it to get a boss's HP exactly where it needs to be before draining their HP with Fireball Inferno is basically all you need for all of the boss fights. Also worth noting is that Fireball Inferno got a damage buff from 40 to 48, which is pretty sweet, not gonna lie, it was not needed, but it was very nice. And I mean, yeah, other attacks in Fire's kit are used, but not to nearly the same extent. Everything so far is very good, but Fireball Inferno still doesn't deal its big damage quickly, so it falls behind a little bit compared to the real heavy hitters of the game. It also struggles a bit in some fights, but on the bright side, there aren't any battles that are as bad as Galactanite. In general, the range of Fire good to Fire bad is much better for Fire this time around. In fights against the likes of Paintra, Krako, and Dark Mennonite, it does really good for itself. Overall, I would definitely say that it's better than Return to Dreamland Fire, and if you want to call it a great ability, I wouldn't object. I stick to very good, but if you think it's great, who am I to argue? Okay, now for the real fun. When I played Triple Deluxe for the very first time way back in 2014, even then, I knew that Fire was straight up busted. What I didn't know was simply how busted it was. It's so good that it made me forget that Wing was in this game way back when I did my Parasol Spotlight. I know, classic Kirby fan blunder, but with all this hype going into Fire, what makes it the best ability in the game? We'll get to one of the biggest buffs out of the way first. You know how in Return to Dreamland, when you use Burning more than once in the air, you kind of start going down every time you use it because of that pesky gravity? Well, Triple Deluxe said no more of that, and now gravity doesn't work its magic on Burning until the 4th use. The amount of airtime that Burning has now is just, it's ridiculous. And the speed at which you can use it, and the distance that it goes, makes it even more abusable than it already was. You can also cancel Burning early with Searing Burn, and while it isn't too helpful for speeding through the levels, it comes in handy with the next perk of Fire. Fireball Roll is back once again, and better than ever. This right here should tell you all that you need to know. Using it to climb vertically and Return to Dreamland was situationally useful, but with Fire being so good in this game, as well as there being more walls to abuse this on, you see it a lot more in Triple Deluxe. Unlike Return to Dreamland, this isn't a Fire's game situation, so to speak. Fire does share the spotlight, oh cheeky me over here, with other abilities such as Wing, of course, Wheel, and Hammer. It's a more varied any percent. Of all of the best abilities in the game abilities in Kirby, Triple Deluxe Fire might feel the most tame at times because of this, but at the end of the day, most of what you'll be seeing or doing in this game is abusing Fire. It also helps that it's a good boss beating ability too, so you don't have to worry about constantly changing up which ability you use for those and having to scramble to find Fire again afterwards. Although, Fire can't really deal with Pyrobit quickly enough to merit using it in that fight. Yeah, even Fire hates that boss fight. Even if Fire was used for every other part in the game, you'd have to go Hammer just for this fight. Why is Pyrobit so bad? Okay, we're almost done. 2 games left. After the singular best appearance that Fire has ever had throughout these games, where do you go from there? Well, there's only one place to go when you can't go up, and that's down. In this case, I am very happy to report that Fire did not, in fact, crash and burn. It just, kept on burning, I guess. Is that how you would word it? Is that... It's good, okay, it's still good. For the main game, it's the same story as it was last time. I'm gonna try to save a bit on the video length and not really talk about it. That said, what did change for Fire was its surroundings. New abilities, new levels, new bosses, and Robobot armor. Oh my. Robobot armor is always good, no matter how you slice it, so I'm actually going to skip over it for this spotlight and just let this brief bit of background footage speak for itself. Trust me, it's good. The others are a lot more interesting though, so let's start with the levels. These levels are very different from Triple Deluxe's, but Fire can mostly get away with doing the same thing as last time, which is use Burning a lot, use Fireball Roll when necessary, think about Fireball Roll when you think names have to be creative, you know, all that good stuff. What Planet Robobot has more of compared to Triple Deluxe is wide open levels. Triple Deluxe had these too, but these were far more often horizontally focused. Planet Robobot has a lot more verticality to it, and now Fire is in trouble. Especially when the best ability from Superstar, Jet, comes into the picture with aerial mobility that's better than ever. Its charge attack also covers similar distance to Burning without the drawback of ever having to land, on top of generally being better against bosses than Fire is. And even Cutter you see for bosses and levels. Still, when I said Fire was good, I did mean it. Fire is good. It's outclassed now by not only Jet, but even Cutter. You could certainly argue Hammer and Ninja are straight up better, since it's best to get rid of it for them. You only lose them later for Jet or Cutter, but Burning and Fireball Roll are just that good. Fireball Roll sees less use than Triple Deluxe, but Burning is still a Kirby efficiency fiend. Oh yeah, we gotta talk about the arena modes, I forgot. It's a funny story. It performs worse overall against Planet Robobot's bosses, which should come as no surprise, but it's about as good as it was in Return to Dreamland. Definitely like slightly worse overall, but when you match it up to the other abilities in Planet Robobot, it's pretty solid. Most of the boss beating times are above average, but there's no crazy highs or super lows. It's consistent, and that's what helps it keep its spot. It didn't change much compared to the last two games, which should sound like crazy talk if you know anything about how Planet Robobot got power crept by mechanics. But since Fireball Inferno isn't a constant hitbox, nothing really changed. You'd think something with higher DPS, or damage per second, would take its spot as Fire's main boss killing tool, but nope, Fireball Inferno's just good. And yes, I'm gonna have to bring this up now because I'm probably not gonna be able to bring it up in Star Allies. Fireball Inferno can do this pretty easily. This is not TAS. The move just works like that. All right, we've got one more game to go, everybody. Kirby Star Allies. And it's actually not a great start, since Wing in this game is kind of back to being the de facto ability. No other ability really sees any use in any percent, for the most part, with one exception that I'll get into in a second. But the difference between Condor Head, Wing's dash attack, and Burning, it's really sad. Speedrunner Demolition 1414, not the only one that has numbers in my name, timed how long it took for every ability to cross the rest area in the ultimate choice, and while Aerial Burning took just over 4.5 seconds, Condor Head took just over 4 seconds. Look, while it's not the fastest time any ability could cross the rest area, it was the fastest aerial one. And Star Allies levels have a lot of big, empty aerial spaces in them, which is where Wing excels the most. So while Fire is overall very good, and as usual, it's back to just being in the shadows of Wing with everything else instead of standing out on its own. Oh well. But we're not done with Star Allies yet. Remember how I said that there was one other ability that saw use in any percent? There's actually two. Sword or Cutter are used for a good 10 seconds early on. But the other real ability is Bomb, of all things. For those who don't know, Bluster Bomb is the best ability in the game for taking out bosses due to what we call Air Bomb spam. I'll go over that some more when we cover Bomb, but all you need to know is that it doesn't really do very much for movement. Horizontally, it does absolutely nothing, and vertically, at the very least, it doesn't amount to anything compared to what Wing can do. The reason why Air Bomb is used starting at the end of Popstar World 2 is because you befriend the boss at the end, Mennonite. See, Mennonite's a dream friend. He's not an ability. I'm such a prankster. Anyway, Mennonite far outclasses anything that Wing could ever hope to do. Mennonite's aerial float is the same as Wing's, so they're tied in that regard, but for horizontal movement, Mennonite wins. And for boss fights, Bluster Bomb wins. So what's the secret trick that Mennonite has up his sleeve? Sizzle Shuttle Loop. Remember, Star Allies has elements, and the Sizzle element is one of them. Oftentimes, you see it give an ability more damage, or it shoots out fireballs, or it can light fuses, stuff like that. These are all legitimately good traits, and while I personally kind of have a hard time ranking Blizzard, Sizzle, and Bluster, or at the very least Sizzle and Bluster, it's for sure up there with those two for the best element to have, especially on Mennonite. Everything aside from bosses from World 3 onward is entirely carried by Sizzle Shuttle Loop. And if you haven't put 2 and 2 together yet, Sizzle? That's fire. Yeah, you might not need fire specifically to get Sizzle, but it is a fire-based element, so I'm gonna count it here. Fire by itself might not be the best, but Sizzle Shuttle Loop Mennonite kind of is. But we're not done with Star Allies yet. Remember how I said that Bluster Bomb was the best way to go for beating bosses? Well, turning our attention to the ultimate choice, this seems to be the case too. Base Fire is far outclassed here, so I don't really need to comment on that. But for Bomb, the general idea would just be to go for Bomb plus Wing or something anyway, right? Poppy Brothers Jr. for his better jump, Bird on for the Bluster element, you're all set. Not quite. See, Bluster Bomb is really good, but bosses have to be tall in order for this to work. Some bosses, unfortunately, were just not gifted the gift of height and are rather small. In these cases, while Bluster Bomb isn't Buster Bomb, Wow, that may have been the worst joke I've ever made in my life. It isn't the best. But no need to fear, since as I mentioned earlier, the Sizzle element often gives abilities much higher damage. And in Sizzle Bomb's case, fire lingers on the ground, and since Star Allies retains that lack of boss invul from Planet Robobot, throwing out a lot of Sizzle Bombs deals a lot of damage really fast. Only problem, the more people you bring into the ultimate choice, the more health that bosses have. Bringing in, say, Poppy Brothers Jr. plus Birdon plus Burning Leo would make 0 sense. Anytime you save a Sizzle Bomb is just time you're losing with Bluster Bomb. So how do people take advantage of Sizzle Bomb? Well, the answer is very simple. It's Rick! Yeah, redemption arc complete, let's go! Seriously, in this spotlight alone, we've had at least 3 different story arcs start to finish. How does this happen? Rick, Kine, and Ku are one singular dream friend, and thus only count as one extra character. Rick gives the Sizzle element, and Ku gives the Bluster element. If Kine gives the Ice element, then that would be super ideal, but unfortunately he gives Splash, which is pretty useless overall. Still, thanks to Rick of all characters, Sizzle and thus Fire has a permanent place in the ultimate choice. Quick note from Kirby fan after this was all written and recorded. There is a new world record that involves the Mage Sisters, and it does actually use a team of 4. I couldn't find any footage on this, but with the Mage Sisters there, it does have fire involved. I don't really see why Sizzle wouldn't be used. So the point generally still stands. Fire, or the Sizzle element at least for the ultimate choice, pretty busted. What? We're still not done with Star Allies. This video is never gonna end. Lucky for all of us, this one is super short. Heroes in another dimension. You get Mennonite for a bit, so of course, you use Sizzle Shuttle Loop, ha ha ha. That said, throughout the run, Burning Leo actually stays a friend for a while to give you the Sizzle element, so even in a mode like this, Sizzle is excellent. Alright, I'm not gonna kid you guys anymore, the video's been going on for a long time. We're done with Star Allies, we're done with Fire, and we're done with this spotlight. And, I mean, we kind of have a tradition to uphold. Like, comment, subscribe if you're still watching because it really helps me out. But for real, I just have to ask, was Fire actually any good? Come on, did you watch the video? And if you just skipped to the end, did you see how long it was? Coming into the spotlight, I didn't know what the best ability in the entire franchise was. It could have been Wing, or Jet, or Wheel, maybe Hammer, heck, even Plasma Spark's pretty up there. I knew Fire was among the best, but I wasn't sold on it being the absolute best. Well, I sure convinced myself otherwise now. It is undeniably the best overall ability this franchise has ever had. It's easier to count the games where it's decent, not even bad, than it is to count the games where it's good. And sure, I won't pretend it was good in all of them. Adventure, Nightmare in Dreamland, Air Ride, Squeak Squad, all of these are games where Fire just isn't very good. In most of these games though, it's pretty pardonable. Adventure has Tornado, Squeak Squad has Wheel, and Air Ride doesn't really have a big focus on abilities in general. Even Nightmare isn't so bad since at least Burning exists. I think the only real blemish on Fire's legacy, and unfortunately it's a pretty big one, is the original Superstar, where it just didn't really do things. I mean, it wasn't useless, but it just wasn't good. But come on, this is one of the longest videos I've ever made. Dream Course, Nightmare in Dreamland, at least Burning, Crystal Shards, Canvas Curse, Star Allies, at least the Sizzle element, Triple Deluxe, where it's the best ability in the game bar none, and even ignoring Triple Deluxe, it's one of, if not the best abilities in each of those games. And to list the abilities where it's actually good but not the best, that would actually just straight up take way too long. Fire is an incredible ability, and one that, no matter how future games go, will always be an incredible ability. I would love it if more abilities were like this one. Wow, yeah, that actually wound up taking an hour. I said that at the start as a joke, but here we are.